And I don't want to jump on my good friend Oliver Stone, but he makes a film that claims, and it may not be false to claim this, that John F. Kennedy was killed in a coup d'etat. And our government's been run secretly ever since, and that may be true. But by the time we've had 10,000 books and 4,000 movies, it's become banal. We have rock groups called the single bullet theory. You know, just sort of making fun of how you can take matters of ultimate human importance and turn them into banality. Now, again, another example, and I don't want to sound like Tipper Gore here because I've got nothing against rock and roll music. Of course not. I mean, I'm talking about a 60s writer, and I'm not against that. But, I mean, we've got all these lyrics about Satan. Well, you know, in heavy metal. Here we take the Prince of Darkness, man, I mean, the Lord of Evil. I love this guy. You know, he's the character from Paradise Lost. And now, he's just more banal rubble for MTV. He's Ozzy Osbourne, you know? And I'm sorry, but Ozzy Osbourne just doesn't make it as Satan. I cannot see one of those lead singers fighting the infinite being and creator of the world in dubious battle upon the plains of heaven. No, they've banalized that. You know, in other words, there's no area of human experience that you couldn't find that they haven't reduced to some form of banality. So that's a third thing, and I think the banalization is important, especially if you think of a couple of the cases I've used. The banalization is important. Let me give you another one where I think it's very important. We have the problem of AIDS and changing sexual mores. So if my principle of banalization is right, how would a rational apparatus react to that? By talking about it so much, about sex with your mom, with your dad, with your brothers, with your sisters, with your uncles, aunts, and transsexuals, multisexuals, polysexuals. You'll just talk about it until the whole subject will become banal. And what used to be fascinating desires, interesting, important, strange, hidden, prohibited parts of the psyche, what Freud called the unconscious, now those are just topics for Geraldo. I mean, Geraldo could literally go through some of the sort of sick cases Freud refused to write up, and he'd have his list of shows for a month. So this is the process I call banalization. And again, it's not irrational. If you ask them, what are they doing? They're journalists shedding the light on this problem. Like Phil Donahue always says, you know, society needs to know about these people who, you know, don't know whether they're men and women and dress like gorillas and live in the Himalayas and come down once a year to have mating rituals with fir trees. I mean, they've got to know. This needs to be, you know, how the light of enlightenment needs to be brought upon this problem. Well, banalization, okay, so those are sort of what I'd call anomalies of the sort of social world. The real question I'm asking here is the one Marcuse asked in the 60s. How does a way of life break down? How does it break down? And Marcuse doesn't give the pat Marxist answer, which means economically. And we ought to be glad that that pat Marxist answer is false. Because if a society could be driven to ruin by debt, the way you know, a lot of people said the Russians, the Soviet Union fell because it was broke. Let's hope that's not true. You know, since we're broke, let's hope that's false. As a generalization, we better hope it's false. How do they break down? Well, here there's an analogy for me between the social and the self under siege. In many ways. In many ways, not in a few. And some of the symptoms that we see around us that our own lives are breaking down in the life of our society is a generalized cynicism and skepticism about everything. I don't know how to characterize this situation. I find it no parallel to it in human history. the skepticism and cynicism about everything is so general. And I think it's partly due to this thing I've called banalization, and it's partly due to the refusal and the fear of dealing with complexity. Much easier to be a cynic than to deal with complexity. Better to say everything is bullshit than to try to look into enough things to know where you are. Better to say everything is just silly or pointless than to try to look into systems of this kind of complexity, into situations of the kind of complexity and ambiguity that we have to deal with now. So anyway, that's one way in which a society can break down. My own view of the United States government is that it has no legitimacy now in the classical political sense. That means it is not supported by a democratic majority of its people. It has no classic political legitimacy. I mean, I take that to be an empirical fact. I bet you could probably do a factoid on CNN about it and banalize it. You go, oh, well, big deal, so what? Well, so what? You don't have a damn democracy. You've been lied to since you were born. Well, that's no problem. We're used to it. That's cynical reason at work. I mean, it's just utterly the situation that I think we're finding ourselves in. This skepticism includes a skepticism concerning history, and this has not been a diatribe up here against reason. It's been a diatribe against instrumental reason. Clearly, the uses of a more comprehensive reason to try to figure out where we are would be important and could be used, but there's a general cynicism about it. Marcuse is an old-fashioned guy from the 60s. He still thinks, and I have no way to defend him now. Too much has happened. Too many things have gone wrong. But Marcuse still thinks that human beings as a species have historically accumulated potential. Over history, they've accumulated a potential to live a life with a good deal more freedom and a good deal more happiness and solidarity than the one they live now. In fact, Marcuse, unlike philosophers, is an unashamed advocate for this project. Philosophers don't enjoy being advocates for any positions that matter, usually, but Marcuse is, in this case, an advocate for this position. His style of criticism, and this is not a method, and it's one that I use myself frequently. It is more like a style of criticism, and here I've got to use a technical term, is immanent critique, internal critique. That word is immanent, I, with an I, immanent critique. What immanent critique does, I'll give you an example, but what it does is it takes historically accumulated concepts and then measures the society against those concepts that have been developed within it, which is what I was just doing by saying these are the following maladies of our society, and they shouldn't be. We should be happier, and so on and so on. You know, this is a society with happiness, liberty, and all that. Or it's supposed to be. So immanent critique takes the historically accumulated concepts, for example, the Bill of Rights tradition, and it confronts them with the historically existent reality to measure the gap between the practice and the promise. You are all familiar with this style of critique because it's, for example, Martin Luther King's paradigmatic style of critique, right? I mean, Martin Luther King didn't say, look, I'm a Maoist, that's why we should have civil rights. No, it wasn't because he was a Maoist. It was because that there was a gap between the practices we engaged in and our promises. Now,